are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 52 of Kalibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. I just wanted to thank you guys so much. My last video was my first solo video to reach 30,000 views in less than 24 hours. I really honestly never thought that this channel would get that popular. So I thank you so much. You guys are awesome. I'm just going to keep doing this as long as I can because I have so much fun doing it. And so let's get right into it. Episode number 52. We're going to start out with a situation report on the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It's D+26, so it has been 26 days since the start of the Ukrainian offensive. And there has been still almost no progress. We're seeing a few fields here and there being captured at the cost of hundreds of men and multiple vehicles. So it's not really worth it. They're not even at the first line of defense after 26 days. They're still barely in the security zone, 2 to 4 kilometers from their starting positions. This, particularly in the Zaporozhye area, this offensive has completely flopped. I don't know if they have something up their sleeve. I'm still waiting for something, anything, but they just keep sending these unimpressive groups of AFU into basically fire bags, and they just get rocked by artillery, mines, and ATGMs, and then they roll back. I don't see what the plan was. I think that they were expecting that the Russians would just run away because this whole thing looks completely botched. I mean, it's getting bad. There was the small bridgehead on the left bank. Let me think. It's whichever way the river flows. The left bank of the Dnieper in Kherson, right near the Antonovsky Bridge. That was recently hit by Iskander strikes. So the really secure position underneath the bridge was taken out. There is still reportedly Ukrainian troops in the area in the dachas to the left and right. However, it looks like the right side of the bridge is potentially cleared, and now there's only a small contingent on the left side. This whole thing is, I don't know if it's just a distraction or just a hope that they could, do something in this area, but it doesn't make any sense. They can't keep it supplied. They can't get enough men over, enough material, any vehicles. They're in a swamp, basically, and they have to come out to the Russians who have a defensive line. It's just, the whole thing doesn't make any sense to me, and it's not working out the way I think they wanted it to. Around the Kremenna area and the Sherbiansky forestry, the Russians are still pushing. And apparently, according to Rybar thinks that the Ukrainians are planning a massive operation in this area. They recently, just this morning, said that 6 brigades have gone on the offensive near Torsk. I don't know if it's a total of 6 brigades. That seems like a lot for such a small operational theater. I think it's probably elements of 6 different brigades, just like we're seeing in Zaporozhye. We're not seeing the whole 47th Brigade getting destroyed. It's just certain battalions of the 47th Mechanized Brigade that are being destroyed. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's something to be overly focused on. I would just watch it. The Ukrainians have tried to push for a long time here. They have lost brigade after brigade trying to make it to Kremenna, and it just hasn't panned out for them at all. So the Russians here are incredibly strong. The units in this area, you have guard tank armies, you have all sorts of different high quality units and brigades in this area for defense and offensive operations here. So I don't think the Ukrainians are going to have much success here, but I think that they're just kind of poking in every single direction, hopefully hoping that they can find a vulnerability to expose and exploit. And it's just not happening so far. Could happen, who knows? They're still pushing around Bakhmut, which I really don't understand this Bakhmut push. I don't know if any of you understand how the Bakhmut defensive lines are set up, but basically the Russians don't have defensive lines on the western side, like seriously fortified defensive lines on the western side of Bakhmut, on the flanks, where they pushed out past the city, and then they ended up capturing the city, and now the flanks are kind of retreating back as they're not as vital. You don't have a salient in the city anymore, so these flanks, if you're exposed on the flanks, it's just you're losing men for no reason. So the Ukrainians are pushing very hard here. They're using a lot of very motivated brigades like Azov and stuff like that in this area, and they are capturing a field a day maybe on either side of the flank. It's once again, the offensive achievements are not worth the cost, but they're going to keep going. I don't know if they think that taking back Bakhmut, the city itself, would be a PR victory. I mean, it could be, but in terms of military strategy, exhausting yourself on a city that you just exhausted yourself on is not really a good game plan. If I was the Russians, I'd be very happy, and I'd be trying to bait them into attacking this area again, because that would be the biggest mistake. There's no strategic value now that Bakhmut holds for the Ukrainians. If let's just say they took back Soledar and Bakhmut, the Russians have incredible defensive lines to the east of Bakhmut, from Bakhmut to like Severodonetsk area, Popasnaya area. I mean, more around that area, there are incredible Russian fortifications. So even if they capture Bakhmut, they would have to take an operational pause. They would be exhausted. They would have lost a lot of manpower and equipment. And for what? They have Bakhmut again? What does that do for your war effort, other than a PR victory, possibly? And, even then, I don't think it's really the PR victory they need. There's also reports that there may be limited offensive operations around Avdiivka, which we'll see how that pans out. Limited operations means that they're probably just going to try to reduce the encirclement that is occurring around Avdiivka by the Russians. And if they can do that, it'll just buy them more time on the Donetsk front right there. So that's pretty much a wrap for the counteroffensive. There is a timeline on this now for the Ukrainians. July 11th is the NATO summit. This is where Ukraine has expected to receive NATO membership, or a pathway to that. We'll see, but they have to get something done. They have to make a push to get some sort of show that they can do, that they can progress with the Western support that they're fighting so hard to receive. Ben Wallace came out and said before this, if you guys don't know, Ben Wallace is a British official. He is one of the people who was potentially going to receive the top position at NATO. That's not looking like it's going to happen anymore. He's pretty hardline on the Ukraine issue. And Ben Wallace basically came out and said that at the NATO summit, they should skip the action plan for Ukraine, which the action plan is what NATO provides to potential NATO members that want to join. And it is a step-by-step process of what they have to do within their country to achieve NATO membership. It would be removing the Russians, solving the Donbass issue, so on and so forth. Ben Wallace is saying that they should just skip that altogether, which basically probably means just outright offering NATO membership to Ukraine, which is crazy. I mean, that's the red line for Russia. That would be the end. That would be not the right move. I think the West knows that. I don't know why Ben Wallace is saying such crazy things. They're so overinvested in this. There is no route that they can take now as an off ramp, and they're just doubling down. And it is getting horrific. The situation in Europe continues to deteriorate, but they're not budging on this issue. I don't know if they still think that they can win this. Maybe they think they can. Maybe they have information. I don't know. But as far as I can see, the Russians aren't going to collapse anytime soon. They were really banking on that whole Prigozhin situation. They've been running a huge information campaign alongside of it, and it didn't pan out any of the way that they wanted it to. So on another topic of this NATO summit, the British permanent representative to NATO said that one should not wait for an announcement on F-16s. This is, this is something that is probably expected. I mean, F-16s are not suited for Ukraine. They would have to come from EU countries who are probably not wanting to give up their Air Force, and they don't have pilot training yet. It takes years to produce well-experienced and professional pilots. They don't have years. And you can't just take somebody who flies a MiG and put them into an F-16. That's a good way to get F-16 shot down. People make mistakes because they revert to their original training. So you're looking for new pilots, young guys who are going to go and train for a couple months on an F-16 and then be thrown into combat. It's just a good way to get F-16 shot down. It doesn't make any sense. So that is what we're looking at from the NATO summit. There's also talk of a possible ATACMS delivery. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. What ATACMS is, what does it achieve, and how is it different from the other weapon systems that Ukraine has received? This has been a long goal of the Ukrainian armed forces, is to receive these ATACMS. Russia has made it very clear that this is a red line. ATACMS is a ballistic missile system that could potentially hit targets deep in Russia, depending on which model they receive. If they receive I think it's the Mark 1, they get, it's 108-mile range, which is not significant for Russia. But if they get the other version, it's a 300-mile range, and that would put multiple Russian cities and deep areas into strike zone. And if that were to occur, that would be crossing a Russian red line once again. Will Russia respond? Who knows? I think that the situation has changed in Moscow, where they are responding now actively to these threats. We're seeing a lot less audacious movements from the AFU, and a lot less escalatory attacks. We've really seen it slow down. And a good question is, why do the Ukrainians want the ATACMS? Why is the U.S. potentially going to send them? And there's only a couple things that I can think of. One, you just want further deep strike capability. There's only so many Storm Shadow missiles, and a lot of them have already been used. Actually, this morning we saw that a Storm Shadow missile was shot down on the way to Berdyansk. A couple hit in Berdyansk as well. So they're still using them, but they are not overly effective, and they don't have the numbers to really do a significant amount of damage, like a lot of damage. They are hitting targets, but it's nothing compared to what the Russians are hitting. The attrition is not there. It's not a winning formula. The Ukrainians will lose this battle by the end of the day. So adding additional deep strike capabilities, just diversifies your possibilities when it comes to attacking Russian positions. The problem with the ATACMS is that it is a ballistic missile. I'm going to put up this diagram so you guys can see. You can ignore the hypersonic glide vehicle. That's not relevant in this conversation right now, but you can see how a cruise missile operates, which is much harder to intercept. It flies very low to the ground, and it avoids, and it's maneuverable. So it avoids detection by radar and avoids air defense pockets to hit its target. It can fly around in circles if it wants. Ballistic missiles are on a set ballistic trajectory. That's why they're called ballistic. You fire them, they arch, and then they come back down and hit their target. Russian air defense is highly capable of intercepting these. They will be intercepted. And I just don't know what really they're hoping to achieve here, other than potentially just escalating the conflict, or if it's out of complete desperation because they have nothing else to send, that could also be a possibility. The Russians have said for a long time that this is a red flag. I will be very interested to see how they respond to this. I don't know. They might not do anything. It just depends on how confident they are in the situation in Ukraine, how confident they are in the situation domestically in Russia. there's a lot that factors into this, and I'm not going to make any predictions about how the Russians will respond, but I would expect some form of response the second these weapons are used, especially if they're used on Russian territory. And with this June 11th or July 11th, sorry, NATO summit coming up, the Ukrainians have began preparing civilian infrastructure around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and preparing military units around the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant for a possible disaster. They're saying the 7th of July. That's 6 days before the NATO meeting. It'll give time for the news to kind of develop on the situation. And with this July 11th NATO meeting coming up, I would also expect in the coming days some large Ukrainian offensive operation. I don't know where that's going to be, but they have to get something going. They have to start achieving some sort of objective goals, or why would the West continue supporting? Outside of them being completely overinvested, but there is a growing contingent of both EU and US policymakers who are starting to doubt this whole thing. Viktor Orban is already completely off board with this. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden, Norway, those countries are still really on board and completely demilitarizing themselves. It's getting to the point where they're actively cutting it down on their own military, just because they think that they're under the protection of NATO. Which, if NATO collapses or something happens to NATO, that goes out the window, and now you don't have an army. So there's very little self-preservation going on in Europe right now. And that brings us to my final topic, which is what's going on in France. Currently in France, there are a lot of riots going on. It started out as protesting against pension reform, but now it's just turned into directionless burnings of like government buildings, looting of private companies, and they're actually going after police stations and retrieving guns and weapons from police stations. So there is this heightened level of chaos in France right now. And I always say that France is really the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the EU. They're going to exhibit the civil unrest, and I guess, France is not. The French have never been afraid to revolt and to protest. They're the first ones to do it. So if you're looking for endemic problems within the EU, a good place to look is France, because if France starts exhibiting these things, it's coming to the rest of the EU, unless it is a French specific issue, but it's not. We've seen increased inflation on food right before this. You start pricing people out of their own country, and they can't afford to eat and everything. People are going to get unhappy, and people are going to protest, and then it turns into riots. So this is going to, I don't know if this is necessarily going to happen throughout the rest of Europe, but you have Germany, who is looking basically down the barrel of a depression right now. If not a depression, a horrible, horrible recession, and no real plan to get out of it. They gave up cheap Russian energy, which was the backbone of their industry, and German industry was the backbone of Europe. There is no other bigger production country in the in the EU. So I would watch France very closely. This could all just die out tomorrow, as riots do. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of direction. They're not going after very important targets. It's a lot of like Nike stores getting looted and stuff, but the damage is immense, and there are casualties on both sides, the police and the rioters. France is about to potentially announce a state of emergency. The big winner in this whole thing is going to be the right. Everybody, all of the relaxed people who aren't out rioting, or all the business owners, are going to see Macron failing to control the situation, which is hurting the average Frenchman. And I bet that there's going to be a swing towards Le Pen and the right-wing party. The next election is far off, but if this continues, Macron is going to be in an incredibly precarious situation, and I don't know if he survives it. So we'll see. An interesting aspect of all this French nonsense, though, is the US domestic coverage. I don't live in another country, so I can't see how Canada's covering it, how Europe is covering it. I can go to their websites, but if you go to CNN, Fox, or any of those, I'll just show you. I went to Fox here, and you go to the world section. Well, first off, it's not on the main page at all. You scroll down, not on the main page at all. Then you go to the world section, and you can go to economic, whatever. You go through all of these, and you don't see a blip. You don't see a peep about what's going on in France. CNN has some very light coverage of it, where they talk about, the riots a little bit, but they're making it out to be much smaller and less important than it actually is. If this was happening in downtown Moscow, what do you think the coverage would be? That's the question. It doesn't fit their narrative of success. It doesn't fit their narrative of a united EU and NATO. It doesn't. It shows that there are endemic problems that are not being solved, and that can probably not be solved just based off of the sanction situation and how poor Europe has positioned itself for the next however long the sanctions last. Could be 5, 10, 15, 20. They could never end. And that is going to cause issues. Europe is not self-sufficient. They need fuel, they need food, they need all these different things from all over the world, and everything's getting more expensive. So I think that tonight you will see a vicious crackdown in France by the military and police. We'll see if that exacerbates the problem or quells it. Who knows? But Macron has to do something, or the damage is going to become extensive and untenable for his position. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up today, guys. Thank you so much. If you don't mind liking, subscribing, sharing my post is the best way you can help me. Just get it out there. I want to reach 50,000 views regularly on my videos. That's my goal now. And I would like to get to 20,000 subscribers. I'm just setting small goals for myself, and we're achieving them. So thank you guys so much. I'll be back soon. Take care. Bye.